Okay, I think I'm on. I got up early today, and I did just post our teaching post. I added the little other video with the cop thing. You could you could just read what I wrote on that. It's just I got a call. I got up early. I was not feeling well, but I probably should have talked about issues yesterday. But I purposefully kind of waited because I'm focusing on getting some of those teaching posts out, and this is our main goal: is to teach, to communicate. I don't want to just be like blogging, and I have to be interactive with people. But I feel like I'm supposed to work on all of the teachings and all, which I obviously still do. But I got up early. I got up at about 4, and it's 7. And I only put my phone on in the morning because I might make a video. So I put it on like an hour ago, and I had a couple of texts, or one text from a friend. I won't give too many names here, but it was like an emergency text. I called him back, and he was shocked because they know I don't call my friend. I just look at text. But it had, I won't give too much on this. I've had a bunch of friends die in the last year and a half, and I was discussing that. Some of them have died. They might say they were overdoses. Here, in maybe in other places as well, I'll give this name. There's something called a hot shot. A hot shot basically means if people are going to kill people, the way they do it normally is not like shooting somebody in the head with a gun. Sometimes they shoot them up with either heroin, or meaning if somebody is a known IV intravenous drug user, the way that people might be able to kill those people is if you're with them, and that's called a hot shot, all right? You overdose the person with the needle. So there were questions about some of the people who died, some of my friends, and I've been hearing it. And so that call had something to do with that, all right? And all of the names that were used were all people I know. And so, because I talk on issues, but supposedly it's cops have been looking for some of my friends. Of course, I don't know exactly where they're at, and so we pray. We just pray. The death penalty case, because I was commenting on it, so I might just throw this out. The reason that it was somewhat interesting is there's a girl here that lives where we live, and she asked me to pray for her brother. Now, I mentioned this on an upcoming teaching video, but it might not come out until a week, so I'll talk a little bit about it. But she asked me to pray for her brother a few years ago because he was on death row. I did. I remember the face, the name, because it looks like the girl. And then she asked me again to pray for him, like a year ago. I said, well, I thought, he was put to death. And then I thought maybe she's making it up. But sure enough, they put him to death Thursday night in Texas. And the thing that interested me is it made it to a national news show, Democracy Now! And it didn't make it on ABC, NBC, CBS, but it was on Democracy Now! And then I read the article the next day after they put him to death. Now, I won't give you on this video, and if I forget on the next one, it'll still come out. It's not a whole lot, but there's somewhat of interest. If I were to talk today, there were a lot of issues with being on Talking Now. The whole Harvey Weinstein thing, those that are familiar, famous producer, famous Hollywood man, now he's embroiled in, if you will, a sex scandal. Seems as if a lot of women have now come out and said he kind of sexually harassed them, and even some claims of rape. Okay, possibly. But there was one accuser, I forget her name now, McGowan or something. I'm not a Hollywood watcher. I don't watch any of the Emmys, any of those types of things. But she was coming out the other day on her Twitter account talking about Harvey Weinstein. And then they suspended her account. And I read this in the actual news. And she's upset, and she says there are powerful forces basically within Twitter and all these things, and they wanted to silence her. And then she posted, it said in the news article, she put something on Instagram. The immediate, one thing about social media, maybe her accusations are true, maybe all of them are true on this Harvey Weinstein. But then it's coming out, Oliver Stone, other famous actors, producers. But notice that as soon as she felt her voice was silenced on Twitter, she went to Instagram. Go to MySpace, or people utilize. I've mentioned how the other day my Facebook account was absolutely, I couldn't even, when you go to Facebook from your computer, I had no access to Facebook at all. Now my computer was working because I was on my other sites. I had no access to Facebook. Not only not my account, but I could not get in every link. Now maybe they were down for an hour, who knows? But that's the importance. One of my other websites, out of the multiple ones I was uploading, they didn't, it's Medium, it's called Medium. Some, like they're trying to compete with bloggers and all. Now you can't post on Medium, but that's fine. It says upgrade, pay. Look, I just upgraded a Vimeo video account. Trump was in the news this week, obviously, because he made a criticism against NBC. And he said maybe we should pull their license. Now, I'm going to tell you, we'll talk a little bit about media. And many pundits, both conservatives and liberals, when they talk about the pulling of licenses, meaning you're not going to permit a certain news organization to have a news license, they said this is the destruction of the freedom and constitutionality of, I get all that. But yet at the same time, I do indeed see so much bias, almost to the same degree that you would see it on some of the websites. And who's going to judge who has the right to have free speech? I know I get radical at times. I try to be responsible and not just thrown out when I covered the shooter case. I can just give you, without being really political, the big news yesterday. And look, I watched the news. And the way the news reported this, the big news, one of them was Trump is dismantling Obamacare, because what Trump did was there were subsidies that the federal government paid to the insurance companies. Now, some of the media are not even reporting it correctly. But when Obamacare passed, and I mentioned this before, what President Obama did was he said if the insurance companies start losing money, which they were, the federal government will offset that. This past year, I think it was $7 billion. Maybe not a whole lot considering our debt and all. And next year it was estimated to be $10 billion. But what's the problem with that? The president did not get congressional approval, basically meaning if you're going to put that much money into whatever program, Congress actually has to pass that. And though Obamacare was passed by Congress, this particular aspect of the extra money was not passed. The extra $7 billion, then $10 billion. How did the president do that? This was somewhat of what you'd refer to as an executive order. Now, when Obama did that, anybody that is just not biased would have said, you can't do that, because the president can't, by executive order or by certain other loopholes, he can't fund something like that. Now, remember how he did it, but to make it simple, when he did it, he knew that possibly the Republican Congress would take him to court. And that's not the first time they went to court and lost. They lost on another thing, and I think it was 9-0, losing at the Supreme Court, which showed you that the president, as much as I pray for President Obama, he actually did indeed do things that he knew you were not supposed to do. He did it on a number of occasions. So when the Republicans took the president to court, meaning he did not get approval from Congress for that money to offset the losses of insurance companies, he lost. A judge actually ruled that the president did not have the right to allocate that money without getting approved from Congress. This is just fair. This is Democrat, Republican, I don't care who you are. Well, what happened, John, if you lose at court? Nothing changed. So we lost. Let's just let the money keep going through. Anybody, if a Republican allocated money, Jonathan Turley wrote a good article, constitutional lawyer. If Donald Trump allocated money for the wall, Trump wall, and he bypassed Congress, everybody in Congress, Republicans, Democrats, every news person, every media outlet, would all rightfully say, you cannot just put money for the wall or for any program without getting Congress's approval. See, this is constitutional law. But yet, when Obama did it, all the so-called true news, they didn't tell you the truth on that. Nor did they tell you the truth yesterday when Trump rescinded it. And I think there are 17 states now going to sue the president over this. And Jonathan Turley, I also caught him on a news show last night, constitutional lawyer. They all know, anybody without bias would know, wait a minute, what Trump did was actually legal by rescinding the money because it wasn't approved, regardless of your view. And what Congress did not do, which is approve the money, Obama did by like an executive action, which was indeed illegal. And the courts already said that because they took it to court. So how would the real news, they should have told you that. They should have said, regardless of your view, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Trump supporter, you were an Obama, regardless of that, what I just gave you is what they should have gave you. None of the news, none of the mainstream news reported that. All of the mainstream, quote, real news said he's dismantling it. We're going to sue him, 17 states. That's all fake news only because they should have told you what I just told you. And they're incapable of doing that. That's why I see it like as a joke when Trump says, we might rescind NBC's license. Oh, this is the destruction of the country. There's so much manipulation. I heard there was a report that just recently came out. Should I get into this? There was a report that came out that said the water in the oceans that they've been detecting on global warming and so forth, they actually said we're detecting a cooling. This is not the first report, and I'll show you what just happened when I Googled it. Okay, in the debate of global warming, which is now in the political realm, the oceans are warming, and we have evidence they're warming. But then there were other data that actually said, wait a minute, we have data that they're cooling. How could, and so I Googled, just to find the most recent one. You know, the 7 top Google searches are the ocean. You know what they were? This is how you could see manipulation. Some actually said, does the fact that the oceans are cooling mean that they're not getting warmer? Meaning it's so political that any evidence, scientific, that might come out that would say, and then I read, and some of the articles were basically just because the oceans are cooling does not mean that the oceans are cooling. What does this mean, John? I'm showing you just bias in things. In the history of science, you wanted fair science. And I thought earlier I'll make a video if I remember a particular word. And I remembered the word, and I didn't do the video at that moment. The word was called punctuated equilibrium. Okay. In the debate of evolution, and I don't want to get into it, because I'm not a staunch, what you refer to as fundamentalist, though I believe Scripture. But in the debate of science and evolution, people have to remember, if you go back into the 1800s, during the days of Darwin, all of the science at that time believed in a couple of things. One was called abiogenesis. All of the science in the 1800s, during the time of Darwin and eugenics and evolution, all of the scientists primarily embraced a belief called abiogenesis. And what that meant was they came to believe that life naturally sprung up on its own from nothing. And the way they came to that belief was the observation, and this is what science is really supposed to be about, the observation of things. And they noticed in pools of water, standing water, you had little tadpoles and things. And it seemed as if, yes, now maybe they just sprung to life out of the water. But the Christians at that time, those that were not stupid or ignorant, many of the Christians said the science of abiogenesis is false. We do not believe that things just pop into life out of nothing, just from pools of water. And those Christians were mocked. And you've got to remember that when you deal with these issues politically in science and all. Science guy. But over a period of time, science actually learned that those Christians were correct, that abiogenesis was indeed not true. And we now know that the tadpoles and so forth, birds transmit, birds bring things when they land in pools of water and they're carrying, and they even did tests about it. It was a famous test with putting, the other thing they looked at was if you leave food out or something. How do maggots just pop into existence on that food? But then they did a famous test with cheesecloth, so nothing could get into the, and we discovered it was transmission of things, okay? So a scientific truth that people that were questioning it were mocked, idiots and all. Well, we now know that all the science at that time, they were the idiots, okay? But it became political. Why punctuated equilibrium? In the same argument about evolutionary theory and all, one of the biggest, there are many questions about the science of evolution, not from a Christian perspective, but from a scientific perspective. And one of the girls from the famous Leakey family, great scientific family, back early on, 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever, but who embraced evolution, but she said evolutionary theory over time has a difficulty. They believed early on that in the theory of evolution, you would find what's called transitional fossils, meaning as we look at the fossil evidence, I thought I even saw a little one yesterday when I was walking by the water. Shells were in it and all like fossilized. But it showed, okay, if things did indeed evolve over millions, billions of years, we would have certain things that would show a track record. And early on, when we found fossils of things, what we found, I'll try to make it real simple, we found things in complete stages, dinosaurs, humans, dogs, or whatever we found fossil. And we were hoping, those that were looking that route, that you would also find fossils of all these transitional stages. Not just between, quote, monkey and man, but between all of it. All right. And they initially thought, science initially thought, we're going to find that. And so the debate, this is the way the debate went. And I read, They said the Christian scientists who said we have a problem, what we referred to as macroevolution, meaning evolution on a large scale where species transition to another species. Okay? Macroevolution is actually true. Certain adaptations that take place, all right? That's what Darwin saw in the Galapagos Islands, right? With the turtles and the finches. So, the debate raged for years. And this is how it went. If evolution, macro, on a large scale is true, we're going to find those. And those that believed in that, the global warming, whatever it is, they said, we're going to find those fossils. Just give it time. The other side, scientists who, and some were not even Christians, they were just scientists who said, no, we don't seem to find these transitional fossils. So as that debate raged, and I read this, I read the science and all, there came a time where the side that said, all of these transitional fossils are missing. And even one of the famous Leakey women from the Leakey family said the same thing, said, we might have to adjust our scientific view based upon the observation we're making. But now it was political at that stage. Now it was political. So you had two sides fighting. They were fighting from science, from observation. And the scientists that said, it's at this stage of our study, they said, we have not found these transitional fossils, and there's no reason why we wouldn't find them between any of the species. There's no possible reason. They try to come up with excuse. Finally, the other evolutionary side said, we've found the answer. And this is what they called punctuated equilibrium. They said the reason we are not finding these transitional fossils of this very long period of evolution over millions and billions of years slowly, which we say fossil evidence is the main evidence, they said is because these species transition overnight. Meaning, that's what must have happened. They transitioned so fast that the fossils evidence, we couldn't catch it. And then that is actually today the scientific term for why we do not have the transitional fossils. And the reason they came up with punctuated equilibrium, they used big words. So they said everything was going along a steady line, and you had, a big jump. But what they have defined with that term is what the other side was actually saying. The other side was saying the fossil evidence is showing us that things are not slowly changing into another species, but things came into existence at set times, okay? Set times. So they took the science from the opposing side and used it for their side. That's called manipulation. That's called bias. That's called not honestly looking at it. And when I saw stuff like that with science or whatever, when I just Googled just any studies that showed the water cooling, the first thing that came up was they had different things, and some actually said in the Google search, the fact that the water is cooling does not mean that the water is cooling in the Google search. The fact that when the president, whoever he is, actually undid an executive order of funding for Obamacare that the courts already said you can't do. Obama himself, before he did Obamacare, people had asked, can't you make certain rulings on your own without getting Congress to fund stuff? And he had said, before he did it, he said, look, I'm not a king. This is on video. He said, if I were to just allocate money and change things on immigration without doing it through Congress, we in this country, because Obama was a lawyer, and though he himself said that on video, like a year later he did those things. But so this is why I laugh in a sense when Trump puts a tweet out. Maybe we'll rescind NBC's license. And then many, on both sides of the aisle, say, this will be the destruction of the Constitution. Whatever is being reported, whether it be through a McGowan who says, look, I have a message, and maybe Twitter rightfully, or maybe whatever's being reported. Javier Becerra, I think he is now the state's attorney for California, and he's on the bandwagon. We're going to sue Trump over what? 17 states? There was a lawsuit. He also rescinded the mandate to provide birth control and all under some of the businesses and all that didn't want to provide the birth control. And then I think it's Massachusetts that's going to sue that the government not paying for not forcing insurance companies. Some can still do it if they want, cover birth control in their plans, but others if they have a conscientious objection. And for many years it was never forced that they had to do it. And then all of a sudden it became forced to provide it under Obamacare. But now they're going to sue that you're violating. I'll be honest, any fair view of all of these things shows you tremendous manipulation. And being I got it on, I already did 30 minutes, I might do a little rollout today. There are, again, questions about the shooter thing. And the timeline on the Vegas shooter changed somewhat. The official timeline in the MGM Resort, they're disputing it. And there was a guy the other night that was going to give an interview on Sean Hannity on Fox, the guard who was shot at the shooter thing in Vegas, Mandalay Bay. And then, he didn't show up. Maybe people said, look, don't give a speech, we're going to get in trouble. So when people see a lot of this, that I don't believe that there's some things that are true. There's some things that you could look at. When Einstein, the great Einstein, when he made one of the greatest breakthroughs in science ever in the 20th century, and what he showed us, the basic Big Bang theory, when he showed us that there was a beginning point to time and space and matter and energy, this was great science. It wasn't accepted right away. And some in the intellectual community, scientists said, if this is true, what Einstein is saying, this is an end to the atheistic view of science. Why? Because the atheistic view was all of these things that we see. Physics, the study of the physical world; metaphysics, study of the metaphysical world, non-physical world. He said all that we know in science and physics, if Einstein's right, then there has to be a God. There has to be initial cause all the way back to Aristotle, all the way back to Aquinas, much later than Aristotle, but the prime mover. Meaning, if Einstein's right about the Big Bang, then God exists. And atheists were saying that. And they didn't want him to be right. And then later, he was proven right in many more ways after his own death. And so science today embraces what we refer to as the Big Bang theory, the point of singularity, that there was a beginning point. If anything exists, God exists, because there was a time where nothing existed. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So if you had nothing, no universe, nothing, at a point in the past, it would be scientifically impossible to have anything today, unless you had a self-existent being. This is logic and this is science. This is the law of cause and effect. So any honest view of all of those things you heard me just quote, any honest view would tell you that the Big Bang theory proves that God exists. And scientists mocked those who said there was a time where a supreme being initiated everything, which we call, as believers, we say creation account. But science eventually backed it up. And science was mocking those. And they also, to this day, use bias and manipulation, and they cloak it in an air of intellectualism by using a term like punctuated equilibrium. So you see bias in science. You see bias, that little Google search, just to show I understand some of my friends are very strong in the global warming. And if you watch any documentary that's pro or anti, it's very easy. What I try to do is watch both sides of issues. And I try to give you, this is not intended to be big apologetic on the existence of God, okay? This is to show you that I laugh when people in the country say, if you challenge the media licenses of news organizations, which I can show you time after time after time, reported things that later were found to be false. And they did it because of political bias. I gave you that. And then you say, it'll be the destruction of our country. Destruction. Don't silence voices. Don't silence voices. I don't like it when a Twitter or this is why I do multiple sites. And I get it. They want to make sure we have responsible reporting, responsible communication. But when I watch Judy Woodruff on PBS, which I like PBS, and she's discussing the whole Trump issue, and she's interviewing a lady about the Trump thing, and I'm listening to the lady, a healthcare expert, and she explained, basically, she said, by Trump rescinding the, quote, executive order of Obama, the extra $10 billion next year to offset the losses, she said, it's actually going to cost the government, the people, the insurance companies, way, way more. She basically simply said, if you stop funding, offsetting the loss of insurance companies by $7 billion or $10 billion a year, if you stop using federal tax money to offset those losses, that everything's going to skyrocket. Now, granted, some things will skyrocket, but she said the government will pay more, people will pay, and it was just amazing to listen to the argument. That would be like saying, I'm giving $100 a month or $1 a day, but if I stop giving that $1 a day to my homeless friends, I'm gonna be paying more to my homeless friends. This is bias exists. The ignorance of people in the media that are on their pulpits. And when I hear them discuss some issues, and many in the country have this, I watched the news. John Kelly had to come out, chief of staff, and he came and I saw his interview, and they still kind of misportrayed it. The media is now saying, Kelly's going to resign, chief of staff, former military man, chief of staff for Trump. He's going to resign, Kelly's out. And then he gives this interview, press conference, and he does it just to say, look, what you're saying is just not true. That's what he basically said. He said, look, you're creating. They want Tillerson to resign. They want to try to get impeachment. I think a Democrat already brought up impeachment. And when he said, look, I'm not here to take care of the Trump, to keep him in control, what he was saying was, you guys in the media are saying, Kelly can't handle Trump. He can't control Trump. He's out of control. And Kelly, in response, John Kelly said, that's not my job. He was saying, I can't control him. He was saying, those of you that think I'm here to keep Trump from tweeting, that's not what I'm doing. My job is a tough job. And then the CNN, Kelly says, I can't control the man. Tell me about your licenses.